Okay, now I'm recording. Yeah, greeting YouTubers. I'd like to talk a little bit about the square of opposition and how it applies to atheism. Well, the title of this is the square of opposition, or why atheists say that there is no evidence for God. Now, that's one thing I always hear atheists say: there is no evidence for God. No evidence for God. There is no evidence for God, and that is why they don't believe. Because there is no evidence for God. Okay, well, let's take a look at the square of opposition, which talks about all these things. All right. Now, for example, the A proposition, it means all. The E proposition, which means none, and the I proposition means some, and the O proposition means some not. Now, for example, an A proposition would be something like all Americans are Christians. That is an A proposition talking about all Americans. It doesn't say all Christians are Americans. It just say all Americans are Christians. And also another one is all soldiers are men. Or the A proposition from the Bible, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. E proposition, which would be universal negative. Like, for example, no Americans are Christians. No soldiers are men. There is no evidence for God. Or, one from the Bible, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. An I proposition would be a particular affirmative. For example, some Americans are Christians, some soldiers are men, and one from the Bible, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. The O proposition is just simply some not, a particular negative. Some Americans are not Christians. Some soldiers are not men. From the Bible, for what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect? Romans 3:23. The square of opposition means A at one corner, E on the other side, and I right under A, and O right under E. So, A and E are contraries. Now, you see, A and E can both be true. A and E can both be false, but they cannot both be true. For example, all Americans are Christians, and E proposition, no Americans are Christians. Both A and E propositions can be false, but they cannot both be true. Now, so I and O are what they call subcontraries. I proposition would be some Americans are Christians. O proposition is some Americans are not Christians. And some have believed the things which were spoken, and some believe not. Acts 8:28, verse 24. Both the I and the O propositions can both be false. Let me say, the I and the O propositions can both be true, but they cannot both be false. So, going on to contradictories. Now, the A and the O are contradictories. If I say all Americans are Christians, and then I say some Americans are not Christians, those would be contradictory. The A and the O propositions are contradictory. If one is true, the other one must be false. If it is true that all Americans are Christians, then it is not true that some Americans are not Christians. And if it is true that some Americans are not Christians, then all Americans cannot be Christians. They are both contradictory. Now, with the opposite of universal negative is a particular affirmative. So, in E proposition, no Americans are Christians. In I proposition, some Americans are Christians. Just like the A and the O propositions, the E and the I propositions are contradictory. If one is true, the other one must be false. And here's where it comes to atheism. Atheistic claim: there is no evidence for God's existence. Okay, that is an E proposition. And Christian will claim that, hey, there is evidence for God's existence. That is an I proposition. Okay, so if there's if it is true that there's one evidence for God's existence, then the claim that there's no evidence for God's existence is false. Okay, but if there's no evidence for God's existence, that means there can be no, then there can be no evidence for God, not even a single one. Okay, now if there is evidence for the existence of God, then atheists cannot use lack of evidence for the rejection of Him. They then must explain how the evidence against God's existence outweighs the evidence for God's existence. Since they cannot do this, they're stuck with a losing proposition. Now, atheists always go into like a vicious circle. First, they will reject God due to the absence of evidence. Okay, and then when they're questioned on this, they will demand evidence. And when a Christian tries to give evidence for the existence of God, the atheist will reject that evidence. And then he will declare that there is no evidence, and then he's back to where he started. He'll reject God due to the absence of evidence. So that is why atheists must reject all evidence for God. Now it could be the same, and the same thing can be said for evolutionists. Evolutionists will say all evidence points to evolution. There is no evidence for creation. They'll say things like there's no evidence for a worldwide flood. So there is no evidence for that God made anything. But they are in the same predicament. Now the problem with the E proposition is that they are very hard to prove. Now I can prove. You can prove a universal negative. All you have to do is just distribute both terms. For example, I can prove that there are no eggs in my hands. I can just prove that. I could just show my hands. See? No eggs on this side, no eggs on this side. I have just proven a universal negative. There are no eggs in my hands. And so I could prove that there are no Russians in Korea. Now that would be very, very, very hard. But if there's one Russian in Korea, then my claim that there are no Russians in Korea is false. So you got a certain problem there. When you so anyway, when atheists make such claims like that, they are really just shooting themselves in the foot because they cannot provide any evidence for their claims. And if you cannot provide any evidence for your claims, it's a bare assertion. Atheists will say, "Well, I don't have to. I don't have to provide any evidence for my claim. It's up to the Christian to provide evidence for his own claim. So I'm saying that God exists, so I must prove. The burden of proof is on me. But what atheists don't understand is that anyone who makes any claim has a burden of proof. The onus is on the one who makes a claim. So if an atheist says that there is no evidence for God, and then it is up to the atheist to prove that. Okay. Now what they do is they say that there's no evidence for God, and then when they're asked to supply evidence for this, they will shift the burden of proof. They will say, "Well, so how do you know there's no God?" And then so, well, how do you know there is a God? Well, you got to prove that there is a God. You got to prove that God exists. Give me some evidence. And to my Christian brothers and sisters out there, don't fall for that. In fact, every time when atheists will demand evidence for God, or they'll make some sort of claim, have them support their own claims. So any atheist out there, one thing I would like to do, I'd like to plead with you. If there is evidence for God, will you listen to it? And if it can be shown that God exists, will you conform to God's will? And so many people, many atheists, they will reject God because they don't, simply because they don't want God in their lives. and that's what I'm really worried about. So I want all my atheist friends out there to actually truly think for yourselves, think logically, think critically, use a little discernment. Don't believe what you want to believe. Believe, try to conform your beliefs to truth. You will find that the more you search, the more you'll become like me, and you'll learn that Jesus Christ is the only way, and He is the truth, and He is alive. And I pray that you will actually listen to me and actually think very carefully about it. I mean, you have your entire life to get it right, but not 1 second afterwards. I would implore you to actually truly think for yourself and truly be discerning and truly get saved. Well, I'll add some more later, but I just want to get this out right now. Thanks for listening. God bless. Bye.